there's some pleasure that people seem to get from that bonding that occurs with another human being through intimate physical contact.
Dr. Justin Lehmiller is a research fellow at the Kinsey Institute, where he studies and writes about the science of sex.
We know a bit about sex, but there's really not enough research to answer a lot of the questions.
One area Justin's particularly interested in is what we fantasize about.
We have these ideas about what men and women want, but they align more with the cultural stereotypes about sex rather than reflecting the true underlying desires that are there.
In his search for answers, he surveyed over 4,000 Americans about their sexual fantasies, the largest study of its kind that's ever been conducted in the U.S. What he discovered just may change your sex life forever. I'm Doug Frazier, and this is What We Do, where we'll meet the people behind the most intriguing passions, hobbies, and jobs around the world. On today's episode, I'm joined by my friend Erin.
Hi, I'm Erin Hannon. I am a full lyric soprano and a freelance opera singer.
She's going to help spice things up a bit.
Tell me what you want, what you really, really want.
Justin's groundbreaking survey contained a whopping 369 questions about people's favorite fantasies of all time,
as well as hundreds of people, places, things they might have ever fantasized about. And altogether, it gave me this really comprehensive look at what we're fantasizing about and where those fantasies might come from.
Before the survey was sent out, it was reviewed and approved by 4 psychologists and a medical doctor. In total, 4,175 American adults took the anonymous survey. The results were fascinating. Justin published all the details in his book, Tell Me What You Want: The Science of Sexual Desire and How It Can Help Improve Your Sex Life.
Some of the things that were interesting to me were some of the things that weren't necessarily consistent with previous research in the area. So one of them was that women's sexual fantasies were much more adventuresome than previous research on sexual fantasies had led us to believe. Most of that previous work had suggested that women's fantasies were very emotional and romantic and not so much focused on things like group sex and other forms of sexual adventure and variety. But what I found in my research was that both women and men had very adventuresome sexual fantasies. We have these ideas about what men and women want, but they align more with the cultural stereotypes about sex rather than reflecting the true underlying desires that are there. Because women tend to be socialized to not want sex and to not be sexually assertive, whereas men are trained to be the initiators, and we tend to think it's normal for men to want more sex and to want group sex and to have these desires for all kinds of adventure and variety. But we see that there's actually a lot of commonality there across gender when you start looking at the content of what it is that the people are actually fantasizing about.
97% of people who took the survey reported having sexual fantasies, the vast majority of which reported fantasizing somewhere between several times a week and several times a day. Therefore, as Justin points out in his book, to fantasize, and to fantasize often, is human. Justin grouped the fantasies into themes, including forbidden sex, gender bending, and many others. However, some of the fantasies proved to fall outside of any given category. One such adventurous fantasy was labeled as human cow. In this fantasy, the 20-something female survey taker described her sexual fantasy as being tied up in the center of town, force-fed hormones so she continuously lactates, and then being used as a milk machine for thirsty village folk. But hey, it's her fantasy.
We all have these very limited and narrow worldviews of what sex is like based on where we grow up. And, I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I went to Catholic schools for a big chunk of my life. And so there was never really any frank or open discussion about sex. And I didn't know much about it. I didn't have access to the internet. So my knowledge was sort of confined to this dusty set of encyclopedias in our basement. But the more that I've learned and studied in this area, the more I just see how much diversity there is in sexual practices and sexual relationships, and how normal is a much wider thing when it comes to sex than anyone would ever expect.
When all was said and done, Justin extracted the top 7 themes for sexual fantasies. Let's take a look at the top 3.
The top 3 most common fantasies in America. Number 3.
Novelty, adventure, and variety. Now, this may sound like an all-encompassing category, but this particular set is specifically referring to 3 things. 1. Sexual activities like oral or anal you've never done before or want to try in a new way. 2. Having sex in unique settings, like in the woods or on your next cross-country flight. And 3. Having unexpected, surprising, or thrilling sexual encounters, such as doing it in public or giving a new toy a test drive. Part of the novelty, adventure, and variety category is food play. Before you judge, consider this. 40% of the participants reported having fantasized about sexual experimentation with food. Which foods exactly? The top foods of choice likely won't surprise you. Whipped cream, chocolate, ice cubes, and strawberries, to name a few. However, these might surprise you. Dog food, blue cheese dressing, corn on the cob, and for the grand finale, gum from the Willy Wonka movie.
Finito!
That's all?
That's all? Don't you know what this is?
My gum, it's gum.
Wrong! It's the most amazing, fabulous, sensational gum in the whole world.
We'll get to the top 2 sexual fantasies here in a bit, but for now, let's look at a simple but important question. Why is sex so much fun?
Well, sex is fun for a lot of reasons. One is that it feels good. So pleasure is actually the most common thing that motivates people to have sex. And so it feels good physically, but it also feels good psychologically, because when we have sex, we have this chance to bond with another person potentially. And that's true whether it's in the context of a long-term relationship or in a short-term casual sexual encounter. There's some pleasure that people seem to get from that bonding that occurs with another human being through intimate physical contact.
His research goes far beyond the largest study of sexual fantasies in America.
I write books, I blog, I write for Playboy, Vice, and other media outlets. And my goal is really to educate the public about sex from a scientific perspective.
He's come a long way from where he started. Justin originally went to graduate school to study social psychology with the goal of understanding the psychology of romantic relationships.
In the process of my graduate training, I was assigned to be a teaching assistant for a human sexuality course, and I had never taken a course like that before, and my knowledge of sex was actually pretty limited up until then. And it was a result of having been assigned to be this teaching assistant where I learned so much about sex and had my eyes open to the fact that this was even a legitimate field of study.
One thing he discovered in the process of training as a relationship researcher was that this field was leaving out a big piece of the puzzle: sex.
And it was kind of this weird thing because sex is a big part of relationships. There were so many questions I had that had never been answered before, and so few people who study this.
Given that sex in America is such a politically controversial topic, grant funding for sex research is difficult to come by. And so answering those questions becomes increasingly difficult.
We know a bit about sex, but there's really not enough research to answer a lot of the questions that I get, questions that students have asked me in classes, questions that people send me through my website. Unfortunately, one of my most common responses is just, we don't know the answer to that yet, or we just don't have quite enough research to say anything definitive in that area. So if you want to study anything other than STDs or, sort of the darker side of sex, it's hard to get money to study it. And so therefore, you don't have a lot of people in that field because it just can't attract grant funding. And then as a result of not being able to get grant funding, a lot of questions just go unanswered.
How important are those answers anyway? Flashback to your sex education. How would you rate it? If you're like most Americans, you'd give it a failing score. Our sexual education is fraught with issues, which further push sex into the realm of the mysterious, the taboo, the topic you're so used to not talking about that it feels quite impossible to communicate your wants and desires to your partner. This can lead to sexual anxieties about whether our desires are actually bizarre and can cause issues with desire, arousal, and orgasm. Sex therapists have found this whirlwind of poor education and false perceptions of what's normal at the root of many sexual performance issues. Instead of speaking to a professional, we opt for the quick fix solutions through pharmaceuticals. Take the pill, increase your sex drive. But without fixing the root cause, you're just having second-rate sex more often. So, again, how important are those unanswered sex questions? They can help us understand the thing that drives so many of the choices we make, yet we hardly know anything about. The answers can provide the insights researchers need to craft better sex education, which in turn can help improve all of our sex lives. After all, don't you want to have better sex?
The top 3 most common fantasies in America.
Bondage, discipline, dominance, submission, sadism, and masochism, or better known as BDSM, comes in as the second most common sexual fantasy in America. The ideal amount of pain was in the mild to moderate level without leaving any marks. And in general, it was more common to fantasize about receiving pain than giving it. Just how common are BDSM fantasies? They're actually so common that it's rare people don't have them. Only 7% of men and 4% of women reported never having them. So next time you're nodding off in a boring business meeting, look around. Chances are nearly everyone at the table has had a BDSM fantasy. That should keep you entertained.
When I'm broke, I'm really good boy. When I'm bad, I'm better. When I'm good, I'm really good girl. When I'm bad, I'm better.
If you want to take a deeper dive into the psychology of sex, you'll want to check out Justin's blog, Sex and Psychology. It does what most other sex blogs don't. Rather than rooting his articles in opinion, he offers sexual insights based on scientific studies. The topics vary widely and include everything from how women who smoke marijuana before sex report better orgasms to what America's Google searches teach us about sex, and even the psychology behind the rising popularity of MILF porn. And, of course, the hottest topic of modern romance, online dating.
To swipe or not to swipe? That is the question.
True or false? Dating apps have changed modern dating forever.
I think it's probably true. And I think it's changed it in a lot of ways, some for better, some for worse. So on the one hand, online dating has opened up this whole other world of potential romantic prospects. And that has led people to develop romantic connections with other people they might not have otherwise met and pursue types of relationships they might not have otherwise pursued.
As it's become more widespread, people are more likely to engage in interracial dating, which in turn will change the racial makeup of US and other countries who have online dating apps. It's fascinating to think an app has such an impact in promoting diversity for not only our generation, but for the generation we'll raise. But online dating isn't all roses. A major issue between monogamous relationships and online dating is knowing when to stop looking for other partners.
And I think that's something a lot of people are struggling with because they're always seeing all of these other options out there and they're waiting for the right person or the one to come along. And how do you know when you found the one? So I think that's one of the sort of challenges of modern online dating that has emerged.
I was listening to a talk the other day, and the speaker mentioned about how you can be happy, but there's a feeling that you could always be a little happier. And so that appeal for online dating can actually greatly affect commitment, as you're referring to here. Do you think that affairs are more prevalent now because of online dating and that accessibility?
Well, if you look at data over time on how many married individuals report cheating, the rates for men, and let me back up for 1 second to say that when I'm talking about cheating, I'm talking about having sexual intercourse with someone outside of your marriage. Different people can define cheating in different ways, and depending on how you define it, you'll get very different estimates and reports. But if you look at the number of married men who report cheating, it's actually remained pretty stable over time. Where we've actually seen an increase is among married women, where in recent years they've been more likely to report cheating. So there's kind of been this longstanding gender gap in infidelity where men are more likely to do it than women, but that gender gap seems to be closing. Now, the question is, why is that happening? And does it have something to do with technology leading to increased opportunities and access? We don't know for sure. It could also just be that women are more willing to report cheating now than they were in the past.
Another potential factor? Maybe monogamy isn't for everybody. The answer can come down to your personality type.
There do seem to be personality differences in terms of what type of relationship makes you happiest. So, for example, I've done some research looking at how certain personality traits are linked to happiness in different types of relationships. And one of the things I find is that people who are higher in what I sort of call the sex-seeking personality traits. So people who are higher in sexual sensation seeking, where they just have a heightened need for thrilling and exciting sexual encounters, and people who have what's called an unrestricted sociosexual orientation, which basically means they can separate sex from emotion. We see that these individuals report being happier in consensually non-monogamous relationships, and they tend to be less happy in monogamous relationships. So it seems that our personalities might predispose us to being happier in different types of relationships. And so what that means is that there isn't one right or correct relationship structure for everyone.
Do you think that fact is possibly a major factor for people straying from marriages?
It most likely is. So some of these same factors that promote greater happiness or seem to promote greater happiness in consensually non-monogamous relationships are also linked to a greater incidence of cheating when people are in monogamous relationships. So when people try and force themselves to have a relationship that's not really right for them, that might lead to negative outcomes where, for example, they're not having their needs met, and so they end up going out and cheating on a partner, and that leads to relationship turmoil and breakup. So maybe if people didn't feel as pressured to fit into a narrow box in terms of what the relationship should look like, maybe we'd be happier if people sort of chose the relationships that were right for them.
How do you think that we could better understand the relationships that are right for us?
I think part of it is just having education and knowing what the different options are and having that serve as a guide for figuring out what's right for you. There are certain advantages and disadvantages of every type of relationship.
The top 3 most common fantasies in America. Number 1.
Multi-partner sex. Only 5% of men and 15% of women reported never fantasizing about multi-partner sex. But what's the sweet spot for the number of partners? Turns out 3 is the magic number. For both men and women, threesomes were by far the single most common term used to describe multi-partner sex fantasies. According to Justin, what this suggests is that the appeal of threesomes has more to do with the fact that this activity creates a state of sensory overload than anything. Partnered individuals often made their spouse or lover part of their ideal threesome, which suggests that people who want threesomes aren't necessarily in troubled relationships, nor are they looking to replace their partners. Instead, they're looking to share an experience together that everyone will enjoy.
Threesomes and the dick pic study.
Do you have any big studies that are coming up next or that you're working on right now?
So one of them is a large-scale study of people's interest in and experiences with threesomes. It turns out that there's really just a handful of studies that have ever looked at group sex experiences and how many people have done it and so forth. And what we wanted to do was to kind of look at what were their experiences actually like and who has better and worse experiences and why. So we have some data there that we've just written up and will hopefully be published soon. I also have a study I conducted looking at why men send unsolicited pictures of their penises to women. It's the dick pic study, if you will. And again, this is another area where there just really isn't any research. And what I wanted to understand was, why do some men send unsolicited photos? And, what are the motivations there? What's motivating that behavior? And how is it different from men who say send these photos consensually? So I've got the data. I just need to sit down and write it up and hopefully get it out there soon.
Do you have any preliminary thoughts based on your research about why that happens?
So I have some different ideas as to why men might send these unsolicited photos. And I think for some of them, it's a form of harassment and intimidation. For others, it might be something that they really think is a pickup strategy and that maybe they have success with sometimes, and success meaning, it does lead to a sexual encounter. I think there are also some men who maybe they just don't quite understand what is socially appropriate and inappropriate when it comes to online behavior, and so they're sending it for that reason. And then there might be yet others who do it because it's sort of for them a variant of exhibitionism. And when I say exhibitionism, people often think of somebody flashing themselves on the subway or in a park or something like that. But this is sort of a modern variant of exhibitionism where people might, show their genitals to somebody through a text message or a Facebook Messenger. They do it as a way of shocking and offending someone else because that's what arouses them. That's truly the arousing thing behind an exhibitionistic act, is that you get off on the idea of shocking or offending someone else. So I think that sending these photos is probably a complex phenomenon with multiple different explanations, and that's what I hope to explore in the paper.
In the market for a new fantasy? The internet can help.
Shit! Oh shit! Oh shit! I forgot to clear my browser history.
One of the things I've seen in my fantasy research is that a lot of what drives our porn searches is what it is that we're already fantasizing about. So if you want to understand porn searches, you need to look at, well, what are the factors that are shaping our sexual fantasies in general? And those are what I call biopsychosocial, meaning there can be biological factors involved, there could be psychological factors, and there could be sociocultural factors. So all of these things come together to shape our sexual fantasies. And then we end up searching for porn that tends to conform to what our fantasies are, because many of us are searching for porn as a way of vicariously living out our fantasies, because most of us have not acted on our sexual fantasies before.
Side note for those who haven't, 86% of people who acted out their fantasies said the end result either met or exceeded their expectations.
Some other factors that might affect porn searches are your own previous history of porn watching, right? So you might be exposed to something new and different in porn that you've never seen before. It just happens to show up in a scene, or maybe you see it in the sidebar in an ad that's playing while you're watching your porn. And maybe you think, oh, that's exciting, that's different, that's new, and then that leads you to want to search for that again in the future. So in addition to us already having preconceived ideas when we go to search out for porn can also shape and adjust our future sexual fantasies.
Hiding our fantasies can deny us some of the most interesting experiences of our lives. The truth is, there is no normal. But when keeping quiet and repressing our thoughts and desires is the norm, we find ourselves in uncomfortable silences. We can overcome these by confronting what some psychologists call the shadow self. It's the part of you that makes up all your desires and urges that scare you because you think you're not supposed to have them. By accepting this part of ourselves, we gain control over whether and how we choose to express those desires. Otherwise, we are repressing them, and that's how our desires begin to control us. Whether you're into BDSM, as it turns out the vast majority of us are, or you want to be milked by thirsty villagers, the truth is, having weird sexual fantasies is a part of who we are. The human experience, though complex, is simple at its core. We're creatures who thrive on exploration and connection. We're on the journey of accepting not just others' quirks and imperfections, but also our own. Communication is a major stepping stone on this path. By opening up and being vulnerable with our partner, or partners, we can strengthen our bond, and in turn, we give them permission to do the same. So take comfort in knowing we're all pretty weird, and that's totally normal. Hey, it's Doug. Thanks so much for listening. If you'd like to read more of Justin's work or participate in one of his studies, visit lehmiller.com. That's LEHMILLER.com. When you get a chance, would you mind leaving a rating and review for the show? It only takes a few seconds and it's a huge help. There are a ton of fun episodes coming up, so be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any. To watch a video version of the series, head over to facebook.com/whatwedodocs. Until next time.
Stay curious.
What We Do with Doug Frazier is distributed by WHRV for WHRO Public Media.